In late January and early February of 2020, just before the beginning of the pandemic, my wife Ariel and I took a trip to Egypt. And by the way, it was much easier to take those kinds of trips then, before we had kids. And on that trip, in addition to visiting Luxor and Karnak and the pyramids in Cairo, we went to the city of Aswan in Upper Egypt, where we had the opportunity to visit the island of Elephantine, a small island in the middle of the Nile River. It's about the size of Governor's Island. You've probably never heard of the island of Elephantine, but it really is one of the most significant sites in the history of the Jewish people. Because Elephantine was home to one of the very first communities to exist outside of the land of Israel. In the early 20th century, British archaeologists discovered a series of Aramaic papyri on the island of Elephantine dating all the way back to the 5th century BCE. That's really old. That's before the Dead Sea Scrolls. It's before the canonization of the Hebrew Bible. It's a very, very, very long time ago. And the truth is, most of the papyri that the archaeologists discovered in Elephantine are pretty boring. They're bills of sale, they're legal contracts, they're shopping receipts, kind of like what was found in the Cairo Geniza. Mundane minutia, what the historian Simon Schama called a quotidian record of the lives of the Jews who lived there. But there were two papyri discovered in Elephantine that are actually extremely important. And the first is a letter from the Jews of Elephantine to the Cohen HaGadol, to the high priest in Jerusalem, asking for permission to build a temple, not unlike the temple in Jerusalem, to serve as a center of worship for the Egyptian Jewish community. And if you go to Elephantine today, you can still see the ruins of that temple. I have a picture of myself standing in front of the ruins of the temple in Elephantine. And the second and much more famous letter to come from the collection of papyri is called the Passover letter. And it's a letter from the Jews of Jerusalem to the Jews of Egypt, giving them instructions about how to observe Pesach, including the dates of the holiday and the prohibition against performing work on the holiday and the obligation to seal away any leavened bread that may be found in their home. And I've always found it ironic that the Jews of Egypt needed a tutorial to help them understand what it meant to celebrate the Exodus from Egypt, but that's what that letter contains. Thousands of years ago, one of the oldest and first Jewish communities of the diaspora was already engaged with deep dialogue with the Jews of Israel. Yes, the Jews of Elephantine understood and were even proud of the fact that they lived their lives as Jews outside of the land of Israel, but they also understood that they needed to be constantly connected to and in dialogue with the Jews of Israel, because they understood that their fate, their destiny, was inextricably linked with that of their brothers and sisters in Eretz Yisrael. And although they were separated by hundreds of miles, both communities understood that they were Am Echad Belev Echad, one people with one heart and one shared destiny. And this morning's Torah portion provides the biblical precedent not only for the Jews of Elephantine, but for our Jewish community as well. In this morning's parashah, the Israelites arrive on the eastern bank of the Jordan River. And as they are preparing to cross the river, to cross into the land that they had been promised, the tribes of Reuben and Gad approach Moses with a request. And they say to Moses, this land that we're on now, this land on the east side of the Jordan, is excellent cattle country. And our two tribes happen to have a great deal of cattle. Can we just stay here, Moses, on this side of the river? We'd actually be very happy right here. And just take a step back and imagine how Moses must have felt in that moment. Because remember, Moses had spent 40 years dreaming of leading the Jewish people into the promised land. But in last week's Torah portion, God delivered the crushing news to Moses that he, in fact, would never enter the land of Israel. Moses could gaze upon the land, but he would never step foot upon soil in the land of Israel itself. And now we have these two tribes who are about to cross the Jordan, about to live out Moses' 40-year dream, and they have the chutzpah to say to Moses, hey, Moshe, you know what? We're good. We're happy here on this side of the river, but thanks anyway. What Moses wants more than anything in the world, the tribes of Reuben and Gad take utterly for granted. And Moses, justifiably and understandably, is furious. He says to the Reubenites and the Gadites in words that resonate throughout Jewish history, Ha'achechem yavo lamilchama ve'atem teshvu po? Your brothers are going to war to conquer the land, and you want to stay here? Where is your sense of communal solidarity? Where is your sense of Jewish peoplehood? And so the tribes of Reuben and Gad tell Moses that they will indeed fulfill their communal obligation. They will fight with their brothers and help them conquer the land, and then, and only then, will they cross the river once more and settle on the east bank of the Jordan River. In this morning's parashah, Moses instills in the tribes of Reuben and Gad what the Jews of Elephantine understood and what we Jews here in the United States understand so well, that even if we choose to live our lives outside of the land of Israel, our fate and our destiny as a people is always tied, inextricably tied, to our brothers and sisters in Israel. And that's why this week, so many Jews here in the United States and all over the world mourned together as we marked 300 days since October 7th. 300 days, and there are still over 100 Israeli hostages being held in captivity in Gaza. That inextricable link is why so many of us have been living in a state of profound anxiety this past week in the wake of the assassination of the leaders of both Hamas and Hezbollah, including, of course, the assassination of Ismail Haniyeh, Hamas's political leader in Tehran. Nobody knows when or how Iran will retaliate, but Jews all over the world are waiting with bated breath and praying for our brothers and sisters in Eretz Yisrael. And that inextricable link is why Jews across the globe celebrated this past week as Israel won 3 medals, 2 silver and 1 bronze for judo at the Summer Olympics in Paris. As the tribes of Reuben and Gad and the Jews of Elephantine teach us, regardless of where we live in the world, even if we are thousands of miles away, we are always deeply connected to the Jews of Eretz Yisrael, just as they are always deeply connected to us, because we have always been and we always will be Am Echad Belev Echad, one people with one heart and one shared destiny. Shabbat Shalom.